ISIS Audiobooks presents an unabridged recording of Some Unholy War, written by Terence Strong, read by Peter Wickham. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by ISIS Publishing Limited. Chapter 1. So, the rumour was true. He was back in town. I'd heard him mentioned a couple of days earlier when I'd been having a few Saturday evening pints with some of my old army mates. It was a rare chance for me to unwind at our favourite Hereford watering hole. Big Brian Duffy, my former troop sergeant in 22 SAS, had let it slip. When he realised what he'd said, he looked decidedly embarrassed. The cheeks of his grey-bearded face reddened deeply. "Sorry, boss," he said in his thick Dorset accent, whilst studiously avoiding my gaze. "Just someone said. Expect it's just the usual tittle-tattle, you knows." I noticed that our mutual companions were shifting a little uneasily. They all knew my marriage was over, that I was out of work, and that my life was in freefall. And they were equally aware that it was Sally's affair with the brash young family officer that had proved to be the final catalyst. An army regiment is like a village, and the jungle drums appear to beat faster than the speed of light. Everyone seemed to have known what had been going on, except me, and no one had felt it his place to interfere or give me the bad news. Duffy was a good friend, and the best comrade in arms you could hope for. It had been him who'd saved my life during that final ambush in Afghanistan. So I certainly didn't want to make him feel bad for letting this proverbial cat out of the bag. To diffuse the sudden tension, I forced a smile. "I'm not the boss any more, Brian," I reminded. Duffy had been pensioned off at the age of 45, and I'd been invalided out. He shrugged, and the powder-blue eyes finally met mine, realising I was letting him know it was all right. "I knows," he said, "but old habits dies hard, don't them, boss?" The gentle giant's shoulders shook as he laughed. Everyone in our group had then moved the conversation on with artificial haste, but I'd thought of nothing else for the rest of the evening. On the Sunday I'd phoned the adjutant's office at Stirling Lines Barracks and spoke to an old pal known as Banger Cumberland, who was on the duty desk. But he was cagey. "Sorry, Dave, old son. More than my life's worth to tell you if he's back in the country, and certainly not to give you an address." I understood. "In case I murder the bastard," I suggested. "Something like that." Cumberland hesitated for a moment, obviously deciding how much he could say. "Tell you what, though, Dave. I can tell you he's due to be returned to unit. It would have happened sooner, only you know how stretched we've been. His face never really fitted, and after the business with Sally became public, no one wanted to know him." He added, "Hope that makes you feel better." It hadn't, but on the Monday morning I suddenly did feel better, because that was when I saw Lieutenant Luke Hartley with my own eyes. As I was leaving the front door of the dilapidated building where I rented a single room with mildewed walls and a worn carpet, Hartley was walking by on the opposite pavement. He was in civvies, smart cords, a tweed hacking jacket and brogues. He was every inch the toff, with that old-fashioned yet timeless classic look the landed gentry go for, carrying it off with a slightly arrogant, easy swagger. I pulled back into a shop doorway so that he wouldn't spot me. As I did so, I caught sight of my reflection in the window glass. I couldn't help noticing the comparison. Me in scruffy jeans, trainers, and a leather bomber jacket. His face smooth and tanned, mine drawn and unshaven, haggard from too little sleep and too much booze. At 36 he wasn't even 10 years younger than me, but I thought I looked old enough to be his father. My own cold blue eyes stared back at me, tired and weary eyes that had seen too much. I ran my fingers through my thinning fair hair, absently thinking that if I really wanted to land a job, I ought to get it cut. But now my planned visit to the job centre was out of the window anyway. I had Luke Hartley in my sights, and I was damned if he was going to get away. As he strode towards the town centre, I stepped out of the doorway, shoulders hunched and head bowed, following at a discreet distance. I kept him in view through the gaps in the passing traffic, confident that he wouldn't notice me. I'd been back in Hereford a year now, following 11 months at Birmingham's Selly Oak Hospital, where they'd glued me back together again, and then a remorseless rehab course at Headley Court in Surrey. It was there that I learnt that Hartley had been sent on overseas assignments with the SAS, having completed his short stint as family officer. That role sometimes considered to be rather like that of a tea-boy in the commercial sector, part of the rites of passage for a young captain. In retrospect, I wondered if he'd been sent away sharpish because the regiment hierarchy had wind of his affair with my wife. The regiment likes to look after its own. After all, I was an experienced W01, warrant officer first class, who'd been in the regiment since 1991, and Hartley had only just passed selection from the Intelligence Corps to do his first 3-year SAS tour as a junior Rupert. Rumours of him and Sally were never going to be good for unit morale. As I followed him down the street, I had absolutely no clear plan or idea what I was going to do. Confront him, I suppose. Demand why the hell he thought he could play fast and loose with my wife in our house while I was in hospital recovering from wounds that had almost cost me my life. Why he had no conscience about shagging her on the sofa while my young daughter Daisy was in bed upstairs. It was something that Sally had admitted to me once in a flood of tears. Then again, I thought, what was the point in challenging him? His fling with Sally was long over, and as far as I was aware, wasn't likely to start up again. Perhaps I should just punch his lights out for the hell of it. Ahead of Hartley, the sidelights of a BMW convertible parked at a metre suddenly blinked. It took a moment for me to realise that the vehicle was his. Damn, I thought, as I stopped and stared. I didn't want to confront him in a busy street, so now what was I going to do? My mind raced. He was already in the car, had started the engine and was nosing the vehicle out into the stream of traffic. At that very moment, a taxi drove up behind me. I waved frantically and just caught the driver's eye as he passed. He hit the brakes. I opened the rear passenger door and dived in. I grinned at the driver as he turned round. "I've always wanted to say this. Follow that car, will you?" Irritatingly, the man was unfazed, as if people said that to him every day of the week. "Which car's that then, Gov?" "It's a BMW convertible," I replied. "Just spotted an old friend of mine. Not sure where he lives now." That brought a chuckle from the driver. "Then hope he hasn't moved to London, Gov," he said dryly. "Could be an expensive ride." In fact, Luke Hartley hadn't moved far at all. 15 minutes later, I discovered he had a neat but very expensive-looking townhouse in a small new development on the edge of town. As the BMW pulled into the short drive, I leaned forward to the cabbie. "Just drop me here, will you? I'd like this to be a surprise for him." After I paid the driver off, I stood on the pavement and stared down at the loose change in my palm. Just 4-pound coins. The sudden realization hit me that it was all the money I had left in the world. A lorry driver on the main road hit his air horns as my taxi suddenly pulled out in front of him. I jumped, nearly dropping my precious remaining change. Abrupt noises did that to me now. Doors slamming, exhausts backfiring, car wheels on gravel sounding like machine gun fire, a glass or plate dropped in a pub. It didn't take much to trigger my frayed and shredded nerves. Even silence was no protection, because I just had to see a sudden movement from the corner of my eye, and I was back on the streets of Iraq or Afghanistan. It hardly mattered which. And people. I couldn't stand crowds or busy places anymore. I never felt safe, constantly on alert. It didn't seem to matter that I was back in England. My brain seemed to overlook that simple fact. My eyes would be scanning, flashing up images in vivid psychedelic colours, my hearing so fine-tuned that its high pitch and resonance almost hurt my eardrums. I was still always searching for the man or woman in the crowd who was a suicide bomber, or praying that I, or one of my patrol members, would be sharp enough to spot the hidden roadside bomb. I shut my eyes momentarily and inhaled a deep lungful of